Welcome to the podcast. This podcast, we talk about places, spaces, and people. And today, I've got Bert Belanger on, and frankly, we could have talked about just about anything because Bert is quite the Renaissance man.
I wouldn't go that far.
He has done a lot of things in his life and has a very impressive resume as being around different things as an attorney, even a little bit of architecture in his background from education, and then a brokerage, a fair amount of brokerage deals, leasing deals, and development deals. And now he's gotten into a new thing of financing. So I could have talked about just about anything that probably would have provided value to our listeners and watchers. But today I chose that we would talk about sort of alternative financing and sort of your new season and spending your time in that. So tell us a little bit about your background as a backdrop, and then we're going to spend the rest of the time sort of talking about financing options for commercial real estate.
Thanks, David. We go way back, and at one point you were my boss teaching in one of those little stints as an adjunct here at UCO. But I started my career. Well, I actually was went to architecture school. I grew up in a little town out in Weatherford, Oklahoma, but didn't know an architect or a lawyer, frankly. And then I ended up going to architecture school and then law school, and did practice law starting in the early '80s for as long as I had to, until somebody paid me not to practice law. And I went to work for a developer, and we built a lot of affordable housing and did a lot of land development around Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. And that was very gratifying because I got to start doing the right brain, left brain thing and actually, think of something and have it happen.
Right.
And so did that and have been doing that, still do it because I really enjoy land development, particularly infill urban assemblage, and worked with you up here in Edmond, obviously, on some sites that are now going vertical.
Yeah.
And it's pretty exciting stuff.
Pretty exciting to see the fruit of your work.
Did a lot of zoning work and became familiar with TIF and those types of things. So, I'd been familiar with a lot of sort of complex financing, but in 19, I had planned to do some development, and COVID kind of hit everybody between the eyes. And
it changed a lot of our plans, didn't it?
Yeah. And I was actually approached by a headhunter who saw I had a resume posted, I think maybe for a state job or something, and they said, "Well, you have a pretty diverse set of skills here,
Right.
or experience anyway." And so they said, "Maybe you'd be interested in this thing called PACE," and I don't know what that is. So I did some interviewing, and then I did some research, and the first person I called was my brother, who's a developer in Ohio, and he said, "Yeah, it's a real thing." So I said, "Okay." So for the last 2.5 years, I've worked for a company called Pace Equity, which is based in Milwaukee. We're a private debt firm, and we sell money into construction deals, new construction and retrofits. And my job is to use the relationships that I have, over 6 decades, and for whether it's in Oklahoma or Texas or Ohio, where my brother is, help developers build their capital stack to actually get a project done.
Let's stop there and let's consider a little background for our watchers and listeners. When we talk about debt, equity, and then we're going to talk about this word capital stack, which sounds real sexy. And then I want you to sort of relate that to risk, both from the lender standpoint and the investor standpoint. Okay. So debt and equity and money and finance, all that, how does it work?
Well, debt you have to pay back.
Okay, there you go.
and
debt bad.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of commercial, in fact, most commercial developers rely on debt and leverage. to enhance their return because to use your own cash to build something is extremely expensive.
Plus, it kills your return.
Yeah, and it does that. So if you can use other people's money, and the most traditional way of doing that is to borrow money from a bank or a debt fund, equity. In my career as a housing developer, we did some syndications where we took outside capital. That's expensive capital because you're not only giving them a preferred return typically, which is almost like interest, that doesn't ever go away or stop, but you're also typically negotiating to give them a piece of the upside. So as a developer, you're giving away a piece of the farm. And so you have debt and then equity capital. So the challenge as a developer is to put together sources of capital and enough money, obviously, to not only get the thing built but leased up and be able to carry you through the period where it starts to sustain itself. And I did that as a developer in the affordable housing space for a long time. So I was familiar with dealing with some fairly complex programs like low-income housing tax credits, which basically get sold to an outside party to help finance a project that is frankly going to have a rent cap in place that is going to limit the amount of debt you can carry, because if it's going to stay affordable, basically, in the long term,
you have a cash flow issue.
You have a cash flow issue, exactly. Yeah. So, I was at first thought, okay, PACE, maybe it can work on these affordable deals that I already have all this expertise on. Well, I quickly learned that, first of all, PACE, CPACE, stands for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, and it really is a program that was thought up basically around the time of the mortgage meltdown. It was a product of that.
2008,
2008 and 2009, everybody shut down, and the banks froze up the credit markets. Equity was not flowing, and the government, specifically the Department of Energy, said, "What can we do to help?" And oh, by the way, we don't have any money. It's not like today where we just print money. Back then, they were at least not that quick to print, so they said, how can we as a federal agency encourage folks to get capital flowing back into the marketplace? And they were actually talking to their constituents, which at the time were not developers, but they were the companies like Siemens and Johnson Controls and Westinghouse, and the companies that were making these big systems that were extremely energy efficient. And as an agency, they were motivated to try to promote energy efficient construction, green building. Yeah. And so PACE was green before green was cool, because essentially what they came up with was they asked the question, well, what do you guys need? What to Johnson Controls? And they said, well, we have these really robust systems, whether it's geothermal or all these systems that are pretty expensive relative to a package unit, say. Right. But if we could finance them over their whole useful life at a fixed rate of interest, that would compare more favorably in the whole.
But typically, banks and other lenders don't do financing in that long a term.
Right.
They're generally very short term, right?
Right.
And so you can't amortize it. You don't have as long to pay for that advantage, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I had learned some of that as a developer myself. I'd done a building with geothermal, and it was 3 times the cost per ton as a package unit, but it had a huge impact on the operating bottom line of the building.
But it would have taken just longer to see the advantage that you can pay for. Yeah.
So I had that background, and so that made sense to me when I was approached. Well, what the government, it's really a public-private partnership, but it's a pretty elegant structure in the sense that the Department of Energy did not try to dictate the same broad program for the entire country, because guess what? Climates are different.
Yeah, different energy needs.
Yeah, different energy needs in Texas versus Washington State, etc. So they said, we're going to let the states kind of design their own programs. And then they also said, the real secret sauce was, how are we going to mitigate payment risk? I mean, how are we going to basically incentivize these folks to finance over whoever's going to put in capital for the whole useful life, which might be 30 years.
Yeah, they tie up that money for a long period of time.
Yeah, and how are we going to make sure we get paid? And so they came up with the idea, they asked the question, well, who can lien the property at the local level? Well, it's the tax collector,
right.
the Avalon
tax assessor.
Yeah, the assessor and the treasurer.
Yeah.
So they came up with this program and allowed states to create their programs, and Oklahoma was probably the 27th or 8th state about 3 years ago that opted in, and now there's close to 35 states that have adopted these programs.
So Oklahoma's all in. You can do this.
You can. The state has passed the statute that allows for it to happen.
Okay.
But because in Oklahoma,
you're still reliant upon the county.
The job of the collection of taxes is at the county level. So the statute allows for each county to consider opting in. In Oklahoma right now, about 20 counties of the 77 have opted in, covering most of the population centers: Tulsa County, Oklahoma County, Cleveland, Comanche, etc. But it's still, a little clunky as far as the rollout, because you have to get that one-time opt-in at the county level. And once that happens, then there's a process by which we can loan money into that project. And but they basically have to do a financing application that gets approved by the county. So it's there's still a few steps, but it's a very I think it's a very productive and interesting tool that we don't replace bank debt, but we sit alongside bank debt and help with the capital stack.
So you're part of the capital stack.
Yes.
So define for our listeners and watching public, what is a capital stack?
Well, it really is the sources that you're going to rely on to fund your project.
Okay.
It is, includes.
So some people might just use their own equity.
Well, it could be cash equity. It could be equity in the land or in the building that you bought. Right.
Okay.
It could be grants. It could be, we've been talking about TIF some. Mm-hmm. TIF is a way to create a
tax increment financing.
Tax increment financing.
And we have a session on that.
Right.
We have a podcast on TIF.
Yeah.
So.
But so you look at those, but really the first thing you do is how much income is this thing going to generate, and how much debt can it support on a monthly basis, annual basis. That helps you build the number that it is that you can ask the bank for. They have a first lien mortgage position, and then you have your equity investors that have put money in your hands to invest into the deal, or it's your own money, the grant money, etc. And then typically there's still a gap. And what PACE does is it provides a long-term source that's non-recourse, meaning there's no personal liability.
Okay.
Once the project is fully built and on the assessed rolls, that can be sort of a gap filler, if you will. And we're being called, I think, in the marketplace now, with interest rates ramping up and really doubling over the last 6 months, sort of the Swiss Army knife of commercial finance, if you will.
Very good. So, do you feel like the banks have been accepting of you, or how have they seen?
It's a mixed bag. I mean, it is understandably a mixed bag, because it's really not. It's not as complicated as people think it is, but it is. It does have a few issues that bankers have to come to grips with, and one of the. As I used to be a banking lawyer, I used to represent banks, and so the first thing I did when I took the job was talk to lawyers and said, okay, we're not a threat to your overall lien priority. I mentioned that, we're tapping into the county's right to lien the property, but we can never accelerate our loan. So if I put $2 million into a $10 million project.
So the collateral is protected from the bank's standpoint. If something should happen,
it's protected in the sense that we can't jerk the rug up.
They still have their collateral.
We can't accelerate our loan. If you miss payment in year 2 and your payment's $100,000, the most we can lien the property for is $100,000, even though our balance might be $1.9 million or something like that. And so we have to get through that because we do need the mortgage lender's consent up front.
Right.
Not just in Oklahoma, but in every state virtually that has a PACE program. And then we're working with just the same process that the lender and the developer would normally have as far as setting up draws, construction draws to put the money in and when it goes in. And
so, are you ever asked to go with the owner investor to the bank?
Oh yeah.
Because I'm going to guess that the investor owner going to the bank is going to need some help explaining CPACE if the banker's not familiar with this process.
Yeah, it's being a new program, even 10 years old in the most mature states like Ohio, for instance. It still requires a discussion. And even if one bank in one branch, has approved a PACE loan, doesn't mean that bank wide that they're, that they've seen it or are comfortable with it. So we do have a presentation we make to the bank, and I've learned 75% of the time, most of the banks that we get to approve have never approved a PACE loan before. So it's
what
gaining
happens?
acceptance.
What happens if typically bank loans are not going to be as long in maturity as what your commitment is? So what happens at the end of the bank loan? Then you still have this hanging out there. Most of the time what we do is we refinance it after the end of the. So if I did a 5-year bank loan, at the end of the 5 years, hopefully I'll have the option to renew that with that bank or somewhere else.
Yeah.
But your financing still stays out there for a longer period of time, correct?
It can. You can prepay us.
Okay.
And so but it's not like, some permanent loan situations, they have what they call yield maintenance, which means that the lender is going to get the benefit of their bargain over this whole 30-year term that they had planned on. And that's expensive. Right. Our prepayment penalties are not like that, but usually by the end of the 3rd or 4th or 5th year, you're at about a point and maybe 2 points, but
to pay it off,
to prepay.
Okay.
But if you don't prepay, your bank could allow your new bank could allow it to stay in place.
Okay.
And it may be if our rate is say 7.5% fixed rate, fully amortizing for 30 years, it may be cheaper than the bank debt you're going to get in a year and a half from now.
Well, and frankly, it may help that banking institution to justify to their board.
Right.
They're not taking the whole amount. That's getting more popular now for the stack to be different. They want some other people to play.
That's right.
So you've obviously you've seen value in it. Have you seen people that have done this because of the environmental advantages?
Oh yeah.
I mean we don't talk much about that, but
there's
why it originated, right?
Well, and but absolutely, yeah. I think its biggest attribute is that it does in most states require that you do a significant savings below code.
Okay.
And
but lighting, heat and air.
Yeah.
Where do we see that stuff?
the eligible cost that we can typically, let's just say we're talking about a $10 million hotel, which would be a cheap hotel. But you're talking about the lighting, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, also building envelope like insulation, roof, windows, those types of things. So it's not going to be hard to find components that are eligible. The challenge in some states that have a pretty stringent energy savings requirement is that we have to do a cost benefit analysis basically that says, okay, here's your plans, you're going to have to do this, this, and this different. That's going to cost you X, and here's the payoff, here's the benefits, and they might be everything from tax credits to for EV stations or solar or whatever, all the way just to the the benefit of our long-term loan.
So, what have been your best customers? What is a very good opportunity for you, and you go, wow, that's a good PACE customer? What are those places that are target-rich environments for Bert Belanger?
Well, it's a new program in Oklahoma, so it's a challenge, and the deal flow in Oklahoma is not as strong as it is in, say, Texas, for instance. So I've actually done twice the business in Texas than I have in Oklahoma, but that's okay. I've done a nice transaction in Tulsa that was an acquisition and renovation of a hotel. And in Texas, I was able to do the largest transaction in the state of Texas, which was $40 million into completing a luxury hotel in Dallas. So, and I would say that the target rich right now, because interest rates have slowed down, the challenged new builds.
Right. Just haven't been as much volume right now.
Yeah, but we can come in within 24 months after completion and actually refinance out more expensive capital. So that's really probably recapitalization right now in our world is probably the real target, the sweet spot for us.
Okay. Well, gosh, thank you. And thank you for bringing PACE to Oklahoma, and thanks for being on the podcast today. How can people reach you if they have a project that they think PACE may complete their capital stack?
Okay, well, we have a great website at www.pace-equity.com, and then if you want to email me, it's just Belanger, Belanger, so but 2 B's, at paceequity.com.
Great. Well, thank you all for being a part of the show as well today. And if you need to get a hold of me, David Chapman, you could do that at jdavidchapman.com. And you can see articles about PACE on there in the past.
Case studies as well.
Case studies. So please join us back here again for the podcast. Thank you for joining us.